Okay, welcome to the Quadrant Community Call. The date is March 5th, 2024. Got one line item in the agenda today from Peter. So, Peter, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. So what I wanted to do, since there are not many topics currently planned, is to bring shed a light on a quality of life issues we feel are important and we believe should be tackled before the mainstream adoption. It's only three areas. There are basically, some of them can be easy to fix, some of them are harder, many of them are already on ongoing work, but I still wanted to bring it and at least introduce the topic. And that is, first, I think the policy status, as we all know, it's not yet ideal. We are not fully up to spec. And from the user experience, I would say the rate limit policy currently suffers the worst, as we don't know the status, and it usually takes a bit while to reconcile. I believe this one is already in progress, so this should be fine. Another thing I think should be tackled is the I would call it explicit provider selection. Go on, Agus.
Yeah, before moving to the next one, I would like to ask about the policy status item you mentioned. Basic. Oh, the one sharing, please. You could go back. Yeah, that one. The policy status. It's especially. It's hard to know when the policy is being applied. This is, I guess, you're referring to the fact that once you specify the policy, the Quadrant controller sets all the needed configuration in config maps and so on. And it takes, especially when it's not the first deployment, it takes a while that configuration to be in place in the limited or internal data structures. So my question here is, I'm not stating that, but my question would be, how critical is this? Because we know we rely on Kubernetes on propagating that, and we know there is it's bounded. We know that eventually will be there, and it's bounded in the sense that it will take, let's say, 1 minute, 2 minutes, something like that.
Yeah.
So how critical is this? I know we've been discussing about that, but I would like to know if this is so critical, because for 1 minute, 2 minutes may not work, but then it's working as expected.
Especially for rate limits, I would say this affects us more because we test it, and we don't know when we can start actually sending requests to the endpoint, and that is currently limited. I would say like you said, it's between 1 and 2 minutes. I believe we have 90 minutes sleep in the test suite just to get it working, because 90 seconds, sorry.
Okay.
It was way off. And what we basically want is just a status field we can wait on. So it's something tells us it's okay. It's okay. From user experience, right? I apply it, and this takes significantly longer than the other policies. So it's pretty. So when I tried it first, I was kind of confused. Is it working? Is it not working? Where is the issue? So I think just adding the status is enough. I don't think it needs more fix. I don't think the limits are going to be changed a ton. And if so, that's a subsequent step. I think at least the status is good enough. Does that answer your question?
To be honest, no. Because because my point, maybe I expressed myself not appropriately. How critical is this? If, let's say, we go for it, and we document we have a clear documentation stating that after you change the policy, you will need to wait 1 minute, 2 minutes, in order to, depending on the cluster and resources, 2 minutes at most, and then your policy will take effect. That's it.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, how
Is it
critical is this?
critical,
This
like
is
in a?
something
Yeah.
undesirable at all. We cannot go with this, or it's okay, or no problem.
It's annoying. I would call it like that more than anything. It's not critical. If you can go without it, yeah, it's gonna be okay, right? We can live without it. This would just improve the experience, right? That's all of these are. We can live without those. We are currently living without them right now, but I think they improve the user experience and hence improve the potential for mainstream adoption, right? Go on, Craig.
Yeah, so I think it definitely improves user experience. I think, as you said already, it's already planned to be done. I guess my question would be, excuse me, if it gets to an error state, is that reflected? Because that's probably more important than, like, if it's silence, you can
Yeah.
maybe assume that it's worked, but if it's silence and failing, well, that's a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, sorry, I'll take on. I think that's a totally different issue. I mean, if it's failing, the policy status will reflect that. I mean, we're not
Okay.
discussing that. We are talking about eventual inconsistency. Let's say like this. So and it's something. It's because we rely on some Kubernetes feature. ELDR is we there is some config map that the content of the config map we want it to be exposed as a file in a container, in a container, so the process can read from the file system. And once if we change that config map, this change in the content needs to be propagated to the container. That takes a while. It's documented and it's upper bounded. We know it cannot be longer than X. So for the context, we've been discussing about that, and we can mitigate that. We can mitigate. First, we can try to force this propagation. There are approaches to do that. At least we know one. And two, we've been looking at a way for monitoring what's really in the data structures of the process and what's in the config map. And if there is a mismatch, how to reflect that in the relimit policy status. Short answer is that it's not straightforward. It will take some effort and complexity in order to do that. So that's my question. How critical is this? So should we doing this or not? Or maybe we should go for the other approach, which is enforcing the propagation, which kind of works. We could try to do this as well.
Well, I think like Peter said, and even at the top here, it's not like they're super urgent. So, but it does provide like a nice user experience across all the policies if they all have the same eventual status types to reflect whether they're accepted and enforced and all that kind of stuff. I guess my question was more about if we had a similar problem with error reporting, that would be probably more urgent, I would say. But it sounds like we don't. So we're good. And make sure it just doesn't disappear and go stale on the backlog. So.
Okay, Thomas?
Yeah, I was just wondering, seeing that in Authorino it's all been done already, if it's so different from what we do in Authorino, that can we use the same methodology, or do we have to reinvent the wheel? That was my question.
So I think Eguski kind of answered that, right? He mentioned
I can. Authorino happens to be Kubernetes controller, so it's actively monitoring config maps and the API server and saying, hey, notify me when there is. Limitador is not. So we have a watcher, but at the file system level. So we watch for the file system file. Alex, I will give you the word in a second. So Limitador is watching in the file system for a change. That file system is being fed by the Kubernetes API or kubelet agent with the content of the config map. So those are two different approaches, and that's why it's a different story. Alex.
Yeah, I missed the. I was late again. Sorry about this. So I missed a bit about the error reporting, but there is a case where you could be blind to something being wrong. If for some reason that I think it should not happen, famous last words. So one example that I can think of is you have an invalid condition. So the obvious case would be like an invalid operator or something and sorry, when I say that, I mean in the limits file, if I guess the simple way to say that, if for some reason the from quadrant operator onwards, some invalid YAML or condition or whatever makes it to the limits file that gets written inside a config map that gets loaded, then mounted on a file system. Eventually, Limitador sees the changes and Limitador tries to pick those up. If there is an error during that thing, that gets reported to the logs inside Limitador, period. And the old config still applies. So we do expose the limits that are currently being used through the HTTP API endpoint. So the REST endpoint. So you can go see what is there. I don't know that we do that. And I don't know that we do that in a stateful way, meaning that, hey, within that time frame, this change should have propagated. It hasn't propagated by now, so something must be wrong. And we certainly don't expose. I think there is an issue for that in Limitador somewhere that we need to have. The idea was to have through a REST API or something, a way that you could say, hey, did we reload? And if we didn't, why did we not reload? Because the limits, and that may be somewhat surprising, I guess, to Quadrant users, because you write your rate limit policies that are independent from each other. But if they all target the same limiter, they get all written to the same limits.yaml file. And that file, as far as limiter is concerned, is an atomic operation, right? It either completely gets applied or it doesn't get applied at all. So yeah, so I'm not sure exactly what you meant, Craig, when you said like the error reporting, but there is that path that is where it is possible that you end up in a weird thing, right? So have a space or an illegal character in a string that you use as an identifier, for instance. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
That wasn't more, I guess more specific. That's an interesting one, right? But I kind of was thinking more fundamentally, the limit wasn't applied because it failed to mount into the pod and it's crash looping back off it and then just constantly failing, or I don't know if that is reported back through the status.
I don't know. Nobody's talking. I'm just handing the mic over to you.
I just would like to add on top of Iguski already replied about the difference between Authorino and the Limitador by saying that Authorino's approach is not fundamentally better or worse than the Limitador's. It's in fact, in a cluster with too much noise, I think one should also expect, the time it takes or some delay, from the status to propagate from Authorino all the way back to the output is just the same. So I think that is a problem that we have to live with to an extent, right? That the fact that you need to wait a little bit for the status to be propagated. I think the important bit here is how we're going to recommend users to act on that, right? And the different approaches that the users could take in order to deal with that delay, right? But maybe Harry has something to say about that. Harry, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. Like all these things are gonna have the same kind of problem. I do kind of think it'd be nice if there's a way to know that, like, so you can do a wait for a condition that basically the config you're waiting for has been applied. You know what I'm saying? And even better, like not, I don't think it's a like waiting to know that your config has been applied, I think is a requirement. And it would be nice if it's failing for some reason to know why it's failing. Right. So that's a nice to have. So like, for example, maybe we can implement this with adding some kind of tag or version to the configuration that's trying to get applied. And then the status, you basically say, hey, this is the last thing that has been applied. Maybe. I don't know. And basically, like if you want to know if something's like if you want to change, like if you want to know if like a new configuration comes in, you have to basically say, well, the new config has a new version or a new tag or something that you can say, you know, basically you can get back out in the status.
One thing that we did in Authorino was that the health check endpoint can also provide more detailed about at the level of each individual policy. So if you query the health endpoint, you can get just a simple response back on whether the authorization service is healthy or not, but also you can get to the level of the details of each policy. And that does not depend on the status being updated.
Yeah.
Okay. If nobody has anything else for this point, I will go to another one.
I thought, maybe one more thing.
Sorry?
I thought Kevin was working on status related stuff. I'm not sure also on this one. I'm not sure what the status is really.
And what I explained before was the current state of discussion I'm having with Kevin, and I ask support from 3-scale operations guys as well, because they are using this kind of approaches. So yeah, more or less. Maybe I don't know if Kevin's here. If maybe he can add something else, but more or less is what I said.
So I saw Roy commenting on the issue about a few hours ago. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, like you all said, this is currently under work, and yeah, there have been some progress on it and discussions are ongoing. Sorry, here. Do you want? Okay.
I'm sorry.
It's fine. So another issue I think is a little bit annoying. This one is kind of more annoying. Is how Kuadrant selects the Istio provider it basically binds to. As it is right now, you can it basically expects specific to be in the specific namespace and have a specific name for each of those implementations that it currently supports. It can be overridden through env variable, but I believe the implementation of this is not ideal. If some of these implementations fail, it throws cryptic messages. And I believe this is partially being addressed by the architecture RFC I linked, and that is the RFC that allows multiple providers, and with that, the explicit provider selection. So user can specify exactly what he wants, what provider he wants, in which namespace he lives, and what it's named. if no one has any questions about this one, I'll go for the last one, which is using. Go on, Paul.
Sorry, Peter, just on that last point, is there any action items required there, or do you feel that it is in progress? It's just not in place right now.
Yeah, I believe the pull request is has some new comments. I believe the work is ongoing. As with everything, I don't require any further actions right now. I just wanted to bring those in the light, maybe discuss them a bit, and basically what I wanted to, yeah, just bring them to light and make sure we do these or discuss these before we actually try to put something out.
Sure, thanks.
Last one is, I believe, the smallest one, and not in the, I believe, in the scope of work that's required, hopefully. Famous last words. And that is using sharded Autorino for Kuadrant deployment. Autorino have a great feature that is called sharding, which basically means they can only reconcile specific configs with, I don't know, specific labels or something. So you can have multiple Autorinos on the same clusters, each taking care of different resources. However, that feature is not configured with Kuadrant, and Kuadrant by default uses completely pure cluster-wide Autorino, meaning every config there is on the cluster, a Kuadrant Autorino will reconcile it. This has one implication, and that is you cannot try out config on its own. You cannot try out separate Autorino and experiment on them in the same cluster because they will be collisions. I think this is just a very small issue, but it's annoying because I can definitely imagine a use case where people have already working Autorino configuration, want to try Kuadrant or vice versa, and there would be conflicts. Guy?
What solution do you see for this particular problem? Would it be something like just exposing the sharding functionality at the level of the Kuadrant CR, or would you expect kind of a more holistic approach where we kind of combine that into some kind of multi-tenancy thing for Kuadrant? Because I think that kind of passes as well through the discussion of whether we're planning to support multiple Kuadrant CRs in the same cluster and multiple Autorinos, multiple limitadors, and so on.
I was actually thinking something even more simpler. I would simply add shard. I would select a label, I don't know, Kuadrant, add it to each config resource, and configure Autorino to only do those configs. So basically, just limit the default deployment of Autorino to only those configs that Kuadrant creates.
Go ahead, Craig.
So I see, like, as well, if we wanted to support this in Kuadrant, does it not also impact auth policy? Because you would need to select which instance of Autorino you want to send the request onto. So which cluster, I guess, in Envoy to use to send the request onto. So it would sort of leak its way towards the DNS policy, I think.
I don't know. I don't follow, to be honest.
Well, Autorino is registered as a auth provider with Envoy and Istio. And so the WASM, well, Guy can probably answer better than me. So I'll stop talking, let Guy do it.
Well, I think it depends, right? Because on whether we want to bring the sharding functionality to be a functionality of a Kuadrant versus something that the Kuadrant operator just uses, right? If we imagine that we can have like multiple instances of Kuadrant running, then I agree that I could also see, you know, the different some relation need to be established between each policy and the corresponding Kuadrant CR, right? And therefore also the corresponding Autorino label selector that you need to create. On the other hand, while you're still working with one single instance of Kuadrant running per cluster, then not necessarily. We can have one Autorino running, and that happens to be the Autorino dedicated to that Kuadrant instance, right? While other users of the cluster can still create their own other instances of Autorino that did not mix up with the Kuadrant one. But that all that said, there's also another thing to be considered here, right? Because we mentioned about clashing between instances of Authorino because they would be all watching for the same alt config resources, right? That is true, right? And at the very least, they would be competing for updating the status of those resources. So that can be a source of concern. Nevertheless, there's still something to be taken into account here. That is the request flow, right? Obviously, Authorino needs to be one particular instance of Authorino needs to be activated for one particular request, right? So it also depends on how the proxy is wired up, right? So you can have two instances of Authorino running, and both watching the same alt config resources. Of course, there would be some unnecessary noise, right, in the cluster. If they are all reconciling resources that only one of them happens to be enforcing, right? Also, there is the problem with updating the status that I already mentioned, but that does not mean that alt config would be necessarily enforced by both instances of Authorino, because that also depends on which API gateway or proxy is activating which Authorino service.
Yeah, you are right. It actually, we do this basically on a daily basis because it has both Authorino in standalone mode and in Kuadrant mode, usually on the same cluster. And most of the tests are fine, right? It's the configuration itself usually does not result in errors. However, for specific use cases, it creates very weird results, right? For example, metrics can never really pass, or reconciliation test might be really weird because now they are two instances of Authorino, like fighting each other. So it's not that big of an issue, but I can definitely imagine it being an issue on a customer's or users cluster. I think it's just one of these little annoying things.
Yeah, I have one more question though. Why is that a problem for because we have multiple Authorinos running in the cluster, but not for limited door? I'm assuming you do not have multiple limited doors running in your cluster the same way you have multiple Authorino instances.
When a limiter doesn't reconcile, there is no way how to get.
Oh, right. Yeah, you're right. It goes to just one instance and the other one's completely isolated. It makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, never mind.
So, like I said, my suggestion would be to just add some static sharding label to the auth config created by Kuadrant, and that would, in my opinion, solve most of the problem.
Yeah, and you're right, that does not need to be exposed to the user while we have one single Kuadrant CR per cluster. Yep. Sounds like an easy fix to me.
Yeah, that's what I was also thinking. Like,
yeah, that one sounds like an option for doing relatively easily. And the policy status is in progress, so really it's probably just the middle one that's like still up for debate as to how exactly you solve and when it gets solved. But seems like if we want to, I guess it has to compete with all the other stuff that's happening.
yeah.
But maybe like one Friday afternoon, Guy get a shot of inspiration to make that happen. Who knows, right? But,
yeah.
But
100%.
Like for me, I guess the policy status is like the priority that you have here is the priority that I would put them into. Like the policy status, I think we have to have that in place and have some consistent status. I don't think there's any debate on that. So I would expect that to happen. The multiple providers is an interesting one. I was thinking about that while you were talking to Guy there as well. And yeah, I'm wondering if that's a problem for releasing something more widely available. It feels like it could be. And
the issue is not with multiple providers per se. I don't need multiple providers. I need explicit provider selection. That's what I want. And right. One of the ways how to resolve it is by doing multiple providers, because that's
okay. But I guess the solution right now is to set n bars rather than like change the CR of
and also you cannot really change the order in which the implementations are tried, right? So if you have met multiple of them, which could be the case, it still can be now nowadays deployed in a wide range of modes, and you can have multiple them on the cluster. Yeah, it can pick up the wrong one. For example, that can also happen, or it might cause other issues because I believe how it is implemented.
Okay. Yeah, that one feels, again, not overly complex. I haven't recently looked at this pull request, but see, it's from Guy actually. It doesn't sound particularly complex, but maybe I'm missing something. Guy, is there some complexity there? Or?
To be honest, I would need to read that again myself.
Okay.
No way. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's a good. I think this is a good one to revisit, though. Like, it's pretty gross stuff to go set envars after you've deployed it, when really it's about the configuration of Kuadrant itself. So yeah, let's take an action to revisit it then. I guess I can take a look at it, and then, or Guy, seeing as you opened it, I don't know if you want to take a look at it. But yeah, if you want to put your hand for that, that'd be cool to revisit and see where we are with it, and see if it still makes sense, and then we'll go from there.
If I remember, one pending question we had on that pull request, which I imagine continues to be valid, is if this is even a real case. I mean, of multiple providers installed in the same cluster in the first place. Right? I know that might make sense for in our testing environments and even development environments, but not sure in real life. I think on Easter tends to be very pervasive, right? So I don't know if that's.
Yeah, I don't see it as I wouldn't see it as a common case for that, but more changing the default namespace and the name of the CR that it's looking for is probably the thing that's triggering me to want to get this done more so than like having multiple providers in the same cluster, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
My suggestion would be try to revisit this, and if we find, we don't need multiple providers, then let's rescope it to explicit provider selection. Don't make it simpler, basically, and solve just the core issue we have.
At the very least, would give us some room, some flexibility to accommodate problems that we run not too long ago, right? When we were introducing support for the SAO project, because they renamed the CR, right? We had the problem that it was hard coded. So
yeah, exactly. Even if I don't know what the solution is, I need to go revisit, but if it took like a group version kind with a name, then it would probably just solve that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy. Thank you very much.
That's everything on Peter's quality of life wish list.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there anything from the backlog that folks want to raise, or any other topic you'd like to bring up?
I don't have it on the backlog, Paul, but I just wanted to update, I guess, while people are here in one place. So one thing was we talked about a release last week, but I've suggested that we push that out a little bit. Just the team is fairly overloaded at the moment with all the various feature work that we're trying to plan out and get scoped and refine and all that kind of stuff. So I do want to sort of force a release, so we'll probably push that out a little bit. So that's one thing. And the second thing that may or not be of interest to others is some good work done by Mike Nairn. I don't think he's on the call, I'm not sure, but he's been able to put together a POC around bringing in external DNS as a library to the DNS operator, which will bring us more in line with external DNS, but also because we're now leveraging that, the changes that we make, it'll be easier to see how we could potentially contribute those back as we build out the distributed multi-cluster DNS solution. So there's a PR open against the gateway, against the DNS operator that adds that support if people are interested.
Okay, And perhaps something Mike might be able to share on this call in the coming weeks or something. Maybe we can get some sort of demo or more insight into that quick.
Yeah. I'll throw Mike under the bus.
Yeah, he's not here, so we can definitely volunteer for a demo. Okay, unless there's anything else, I guess we can wrap it up there. Thanks all.
Cheers.
Right.